All right, let's dive into history today. We're going deeper than just the surface level of Anne Frank's diary. You've already shared some really fascinating pieces from her time hiding, and I think we're both ready to kind of unpack why this firsthand account is so powerful.
Definitely. It's way more than just a historical document. Anne's diary gives us this incredibly personal look into the thoughts and feelings of a really complex and actually witty teenager living through something extraordinary. We're talking about understanding Anne as a person, not just, as a symbol.
Exactly. I think that's key here. We'll be looking at daily life inside the annex, the relationships, the conflicts, those moments of humor that pop up amidst the fear, and ultimately how Anne's whole worldview, her perspective on herself and the world around her, changed during her time in hiding.
Yeah, and just imagine it for a second, living for 2 years straight with 7 other people hidden away behind a bookcase. The annex itself, this maze of tiny rooms, it really becomes its own character in this story. Anne actually describes it in detail in her entry from July 8th, 1942.
It's really amazing, isn't it? The way she captures that feeling of claustrophobia, the constant fear of being discovered, never being able to step outside, the need for absolute silence during the day. It's like you can almost feel it yourself just reading her words.
And don't forget, they were dealing with rationing, super limited resources.
Yeah.
Even things like, running out of toilet paper, which Anne describes pretty vividly. It gives you this very, very real sense of what daily life must have been like.
Reading her entry from September 2nd, 1942 really got to me. She talks about the hardship, of course, but she also talks about these little, almost unexpected moments of joy and even humor. That contrast is part of what makes her diary so powerful, I think.
Absolutely. And perfect example is that incident on November 9th, 1942. Peter accidentally spills this huge, 50-pound sack of beans down the stairs.
Yeah.
And writes about it as this hailstorm of brown beans. Just pure chaos. Thankfully, he did get them caught.
Those small details, those glimpses of normalcy in such an abnormal situation, that's what makes Anne so relatable.
Totally. And speaking of relatable, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the relationships that shaped Anne's world inside the annex. Her family dynamic, it wasn't exactly straightforward.
Definitely not. She adored her father. She often called him the most adorable father I've ever seen. But her relationship with her mother was a lot more complicated, a lot more tense.
There's an entry from July 12th where Anne writes about feeling totally misunderstood by her mother, finding her way too sentimental. This contrasts sharply with those warm descriptions of her father just a few months later on October 3rd. What do you think caused these differences in her relationships?
It's interesting to consider. Being confined in such close quarters probably amplified those existing family tensions that were already there.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's Peter Van Daan. He's the son of the other family hiding with the Franks.
Oh, yeah. Their relationship is so interesting to see unfold in the diary. At first, Anne is just annoyed by Peter. She sees him as immature, even writes some pretty unflattering things about him that she really doesn't want his mother to see.
That sounds like classic Anne. But as they spend more and more time together in hiding, things begin to change. They go from bickering to, sharing books, confiding in each other about their fears and their hopes and their dreams for the future.
Their late-night conversations, mostly in the attic, become a source of comfort and connection for both of them.
Remember that entry from February 16th, 1944? She talks about Peter's room, the cat, the way they were sitting close to each other. It's all so vivid. You really get a sense of a connection forming between them, despite everything they were going through. What strikes you about their relationship, how it evolves over time?
I think it speaks to that human need for connection, especially in times of isolation and uncertainty. But it's also interesting how this relationship happens alongside Anne's own internal transformation.
Oh, totally. She's experiencing this huge coming of age while stuck inside the annex.
She transforms from a carefree schoolgirl into a thoughtful young woman, and you really see that shift reflected in her writing as time goes on.
In her early entries, Anne mostly focuses on, everyday things, the little frustrations with the others in the annex. But by February 1944, she's thinking about bigger questions, like questions about identity, about social norms, about the meaning of life. It's really fascinating to see that shift, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Her entry from November 2, 1942, for instance, shows her struggle with self-doubt. She's longing for deeper connections with people. It's almost as if the annex, despite all its limitations, gave her the space to really examine who she was deep down.
And she's incredibly introspective for a teenager. In her entry from January 13th, 1943, she's actually analyzing how other people see her. She admits her flaws and expresses a desire to grow as a person.
It's pretty amazing how self-aware she is, especially given the circumstances. Even in her more lighthearted entries like Ode to My Fountain Pen from November 11th, 1943, you see her sense of humor developing and her ability to find meaning in the everyday, even when the everyday is anything but normal.
That's a great point. It really highlights her growing maturity and that increasing ability to use writing as a way to express herself. It's not just teenage crushes and arguments anymore. There's this depth, this philosophical edge to her thoughts.
Right. And alongside those introspective moments, Anne fills her diary with these little glimpses into their daily life in hiding. Small stories that show both the hardships and the surprising moments of, well, normalcy.
Imagine your own family's most chaotic holiday gathering. Now amplify that by 10 and add the constant fear of discovery. Right. That's what Anne writes about in her entry from December 24th as they're trying to celebrate Christmas in secret.
It's chaotic, it's funny, and it's this poignant reminder that even in the most difficult situations, we as humans still search for connection, for joy,
And through it all, you can just feel Anne's longing for the outside world.
Yeah, like in that entry from December 29th, 1942, she talks about watching people go by from her window, envying their freedom, but also watching them with such a keen eye. She creates these little profiles of the women she sees, noticing their clothes, their expressions, their routines.
It's almost as if she's desperately trying to hold on to some connection to the world that she can no longer experience firsthand. It really is. It makes you think about those times when you felt, confined or isolated, maybe not literally trapped in an annex, but limited by your own circumstances.
Yeah.
It highlights how strong that basic human longing for connection and freedom really is.
It definitely does. And even though she was physically trapped, Anne's spirit, her imagination, it just soared. Her diary isn't just about hardship. It's this incredible testament to the power of hope, especially her dreams for the future.
Yeah, and despite everything going on around her, Anne still held on to that dream of becoming a writer. You see it in her June 20th, 1942 entry. And that line, "Paper has more patience than people," it always gets to me.
Oh, for sure. It just speaks volumes about how deeply connected she was to her diary, her need to express herself, her belief in the power of words. And she wasn't just writing for herself. She wanted to share her thoughts and feelings with a real friend, someone who could truly get her.
And while she couldn't have known that millions of people would one day read her words, she did find that connection, at least in part, with Peter. Their conversations about life, love, the future, they gave her this outlet to process all the complex emotions she was experiencing.
It's remarkable, isn't it? In the middle of such a horrific situation, she still had the capacity to dream, to imagine a better future for herself and for the world.
Her dreams weren't just about personal ambition, though.
Yeah.
Anne also longed for a world without war, a world free from prejudice and hate. In her entry from May 3rd, 1944, she reflects on how destructive war is, and she even questions what it would take for humanity to evolve beyond conflict.
She goes so far as to write, "Until all of humanity undergoes a metamorphosis, wars will continue to be waged." That's a pretty bold statement for a teenager living through one of the most brutal wars in history.
It really is. It shows how aware she was becoming of the world's complexities, her ability to think critically about everything that was happening around her. Even while witnessing the horrors of war firsthand, she still believed in the goodness of humanity, in the possibility of change.
And it wasn't just about big ideas like that. Anne also dreamt of simple things: freedom, education, the chance to go back to school. In her entry from July 11th, 1942, she describes how much it's the world beyond the annex.
I keep thinking about that entry from February 23rd, 1944, where she compares herself to a songbird whose wings have been ripped off. It's just heartbreaking. She's trapped, both physically and emotionally, longing for those simple joys that most teenagers take for granted.
Absolutely. And even in those moments of despair, Anne finds a kind of solace in nature. She describes the view from the attic window, the chestnut tree she could see from her room, the changing seasons. "As long as this exists," she writes on February 23rd, 1944, "this sunshine and this cloudless sky, and as long as I can enjoy it, how can I be sad?"
It's such a powerful reminder of nature's ability to heal, to inspire. Even in the darkest of times, Anne finds hope and beauty in the natural world. It's this reminder that life, in all its forms, persists. This makes me wonder, what are some of the things that help you stay grounded and hopeful during challenging times?
That's a great question. I think for me, it's a lot like Anne, in that I do find a lot of peace in nature, but also in connecting with loved ones. And, of course, like Anne, expressing myself creatively.
And it's not just about finding beauty in nature or through creative outlets, and also dreams of love and connection. We see her exploring those feelings for Peter, their late-night talks, their shared hopes for the future. In her March 20th, 1944 entry, she even writes about true love developing between them.
It's innocent, it's chaste, but their relationship offers this glimpse into that very human desire for companionship, the need for connection, especially when you're facing isolation and uncertainty.
And even though Anne's time in the annex was cut tragically short, her diary remains this powerful testament to the strength of a young girl who never stopped dreaming, who never lost hope in a better tomorrow.
It's a reminder that hope can exist even when facing unimaginable hardship. And it makes you think about what dreams we might be putting off because of our own circumstances, and maybe what steps we can take to rekindle those aspirations.
It also makes you wonder about all those whose stories haven't been told, those who didn't have a diary to confide in. Anne's diary is a gift, but it also highlights a profound absence.
That's such a powerful point, and it makes her words, her insights, that much more precious.
Anne's diary is so much more than just a historical document. It reminds us that human emotions are universal. Fear, hope, frustration, longing, we all experience those regardless of our circumstances.
Exactly. And her willingness to grapple with such complex issues like gender roles and societal norms, even within the confines of the Annex, it's incredible. You see this particularly in her June 14th, 1944 entry, where she talks about the strength of women, especially in childbirth, and how societal values often diminish women's contributions.
It's a reminder that the fight for equality, it transcends time and place. Even in the midst of war, Anne was thinking about building a better future, a more just future for women.
And her thoughts on love and intimacy were also, pretty progressive for the time. I'm thinking specifically about those entries from March 1944 where she talks about sex and contraception with Peter.
Yeah, absolutely. She approaches those topics with so much curiosity and this real openness, which is really refreshing, especially given how conservative social norms were back then. She even questions the whole idea of, premarital chastity, suggesting that maybe experience before marriage isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Right. She's really willing to challenge those conventional ideas and form her own opinions based on, what she's seeing and experiencing.
It shows that young people, even when they're going through incredibly tough situations, are totally capable of thinking critically about complex issues.
And it's also fascinating how she uses her diary as a sort of safe space to explore these personal and sometimes even taboo subjects. She's clearly a lot more comfortable discussing these things with Kitty, her diary, than with her own mother.
It says a lot about the power of writing, of journaling. It can be this incredible outlet, a private and safe place to really explore your thoughts and feelings, especially those that you might not feel comfortable sharing with anyone else.
It makes you think about all these untold stories, the inner lives of people who didn't have a diary to confide in, whose voices were just lost to history, all their hopes and fears and dreams just gone.
It is a haunting thought. Anne's diary is such a gift, a window into a world we might never have otherwise known. But it highlights this profound absence,
Absolutely. And it makes her words, her insights, all the more important, all the more precious.
Because Anne's diary, it's more than just a historical record. It's this powerful reminder of just how universal human emotions are: fear, hope, frustration, longing. We all experience these things regardless of our individual circumstances.
Exactly. And her willingness to really wrestle with these complicated issues like gender roles, societal expectations, even while stuck in the Annex, it's amazing.
Yeah, it shows that, the fight for equality, it doesn't belong to any one time or place. Even while living through the horrors of war, Anne was already thinking about creating a better future, a more just future for women.
And ultimately, I think that's what makes Anne Frank's diary so enduring. It's not just a story about a young girl hiding during World War II. It's a story about resilience, about hope, about the power of the human spirit to find beauty and meaning even in the absolute darkest of times.
It's a story that continues to speak to people across generations. It reminds us how important empathy is, how important understanding is, and that the fight for a more just and compassionate world is something worth fighting for.
A world where, hopefully, stories like Anne's will never have to be told again.